Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we bring you a special Alexey Arestovych, former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel, and Yulia Latynina, a Russian investigative journalist. They do an hour-plus deep dive into the past of Russian Empire, into how Putin is killing it, and how Moscow-centric picture of the world in Eastern Europe is crumbling. How did Moscow become Russia? Because it was Kiev before. And if Moscow was playing a smart card, how they should have gone about adding Ukraine under their belt. This is a rather fascinating historic dive. Enjoy. Hi, this is Yulia Latynina and Latynina TV. Today we have Alexey Arestovych as our special guest. And I think every week on Thursday will be more or less set to have an interview. Right. Sorry, I slipped the other week. It was an exception. Okay, so briefly speaking, please subscribe to our channel, to Latynina TV, to Alexey Arestovych channel, and of course to the Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that in English. Share and click the like button. I have a first question. I actually did not want to start talking about missiles because, of course, first of all, Putin outdid himself again. There are more dead civilians as a result of recent missile attack. But from the military standpoint, this is nothing unusual, unfortunately. And the missiles were rather successfully shot down, a lot of them. We were discussing with the previous guest that United States recently have shot down some objects too. Those aerial balloons, supposedly Chinese, who were sent over the United States, and we were discussing how did it come about that Russia sent several balloons towards Kiev. That became a piece of news yesterday. So I can only imagine how Putin in his bunker was listening to the news from the United States and said, well, why don't we start sending balloons over Ukraine as well? Because they apparently gather intel. And they outfitted real intel balloons with real equipment to try to trace their air defense systems. And his generals followed through and reported, hey, we did it. So I'm just trying to imagine how did that come about. Yulia, from 2014, for the last 7-8 years, Russian military machine was doing madness. It is working in the most ineffective way in Ukraine. On every stage, in every operation they do in that conflict. This can be explained only with one thing, that their political leadership that has taken charge of operations, they either know nothing about warfare, about conducting military operations, or they don't give a crap or don't even realize what is happening. Remember the conversation of Stirlitz with the general in a train. It's a reference back to the Second World War, when they were discussing a story of an infantryman getting a general rank and trying to pretend that he is a general and trying to flow the decisions with horrible consequences. And on the military side, yeah, you can see that they're trying some different tactics, and under that general and under the general umbrella of poor decisions, they're still experimenting. They're still trying to do something new, and that balloon and missile attacks in the depth of the night, that's their attempts to change something. Oh yeah, that's similar to story in Vugleda, right? When Marines were sent time and time again until they were completely destroyed by defending Ukrainian forces, and then they had to withdraw and ran back across the minefields and blew the rest of whatever was left of them. And then you see Putin out talking and saying that he served as a Marine in the military. So yeah, we were laughing that his double probably served. So I have another question. We were busy calculating what and who is giving to Ukraine. We'll continue doing that as Rammstein is going on. But I was also thinking about structural things. Army as a structure. It's It's a structure that is designed to fight war, and we understand now how bad Putin's structure is. We also understand that nervous system of reporting is reporting really poorly to Putin, is really failing with their information to the leadership of Russia, because if his nervous system is not working and he set his butt in the fire and he's burning, but nervous system is saying everything is all right, that may end real bad for them. Yulia, nothing changed for what, about a year? We discussed that about last spring, when one of the problems in Russia is the weakness of generals. And we're referring back to Soviet times, when people cannot object to their leadership. And it's a kind of common situation, common trait. It can happen in Washington, it can happen in China, it can happen in Russia. Subject and subjectivity of a person starts from the word no, especially on the strategic scale. And in Russia, apparently, there are not too many generals who are capable of saying no to Putin. Do you think Putin, Alexey, understands what is going on the front? Just like with the details of these Marines or paratroopers, did he understand that he achieved exactly contrary, that he made Ukraine a regional power, which was rather difficult to imagine 10 years ago? He actually, I think, Yulia, made a more dangerous thing than that. It's under Putin that Russia stopped being an empire since 1725, I think. Just as a result of his activity on this conflict. These things are interrelated. Ukraine as a regional power and Russian Empire losing its grip. But if one becomes, or let's play out from the Russian imperial viewpoint, the results are very disturbing. When you said that, I was actually thinking that Putin never mentioned that he wants to revive Russian Empire or even Soviet Union. He was always saying Russian world. And I was thinking that it may not be a random, because Russian Empire used to be a peculiar entity. Just like any empire, they were leaning to be Eurocentric. So Russian Empire in the 18th century, for example, the biggest group in management was dukes of what was back then German and France lands, and nobility coming from Europe. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Russian Empire, would it have not been European Eurocentric, would not have been able to conquer territories, and would have failed in their quest if they didn't have Ukraine with them. So I'm thinking that Putin is actually being a Moscovia, a Moscow country, a Moscow-centric country. And do you think they can capture anything in that format? No, Yulia, I don't think they can conquer anything except for some nearby neighbors. That's something else here, I think. Putin, in his politics, is demonstrating that he indeed wants to build a Russian-centric country. Then I have a question: what other 85 subjects of their current structure will be doing in that organization? Adygea, Dagestan, Mordovia, Yakutia, Buryatia, and others. How will they be connected to that national Russian state? That remains a question. You know, empire had difficult times before. They had good times, bad times, but they always stayed an empire. An empire, good or bad, it still resolves a task of bringing civilization to the borders that it wants to expand to. Empire has two systemic features, two defining features. One is that it can allow existence of several cultural codes within itself. It allows for other cultures to coexist. Actually, there are three features, I think. Second, it brings civilizational advancement. And third, it brings civilizational advancement as a project with a global pretense. So the idea of an empire is an idea for humankind, for the globe, for the wider audience. Why China has never been a successful empire? Because it's very regional. It's their idea is Han imperialism. And Putin's situation is also rather fake because they're claiming that Russia is an empire, but in their politics, in Putin's politics, there is nothing reflective of any sign of empire. If you start to deep dive into that, he's probably the main anti-imperialist in Russia. In Stalin times, he would have been executed already. In Tsar times, he would probably be pushing barrels and cartwheels in Sakhalin somewhere on the far east of Russia. Very few people understand that Russian and Soviet projects, they are actually in opposition to each other. And our home politologists, they start to scream that no, that's a propaganda. No, I have to outline again that these are two different things. Putin is destroying the imperial idea. At the core, everything he is doing is killing the imperial idea. And he's building something like a Moscow-based country, Moscow-centric mononational country that has zero imperial ideology. The feature of an empire is to have an idea that's bigger than the territory, bigger than the empire right now. And if you don't have such an idea, you don't have an empire. Even if you have somebody who claims to be an emperor and the country calls themselves an empire. Putin is doing everything so that idea would never show up. And if it starts stemming, they trample on it. And I keep saying that the most suffering people in Russia are imperialists, just like Strelkov. He's in his declarations, he's very imperial, and he is definitely suffering from Putin's politics. I want to remind that when empire was declared by Peter the Great, it was back in the day only Roman was empire. It was a name of a Roman empire, essentially, and it was part of that title. So he was trying to plan a country with roots coming out of the Roman Empire. And the person who planted this idea in his head was Feofan Prokopovich. He was actually a Ukrainian-born monk. So, Alexey, maybe you can elaborate. Well, the genesis of the Moscow idea was roughly as follows. At first, Italian merchants who were trading with Byzantine and had their bonuses from all the big historic discoveries of America, and they were discovering ways to India through Cape Horn. And those city republics of Italy, like Pisa, Genoa, and the others, they were living real well through trade with Byzantine. And they didn't care that Byzantine Empire was orthodox. They were doing well. They were actually cooperating and managing finance and doing a lot of things together. When they saw that Constantinople is crumbling under the pressure of Turks, they started to look for something to replace it with. And there were no governments, big governments like Byzantine, which were Orthodox Christianities in that time. There were some republics, and Moscow was one of the small duchies that was figuring that out and was Orthodoxy. So they started planting the idea of a third Rome into the heads of John III, Ivan III in Moscow. They actually promoted the idea of calling him a king, a czar, instead of a duke, knyaz. They partook politically in that eventuality, and they were glad when Russia fended itself off and ended paying the taxes to Mongol Empire. And Ion III became the first Tsar, and his wife was Sophia Paleolog, the last princess of Constantinople. So he kind of inherited that idea from Constantinople, and they felt themselves in Moscow as rightful heirs to the idea of Constantinople. And this is an idea that gives them the right to that empire and the right to, on the historic level, on the meta level, the right to get more lands under their belt. And it took some time, but Tsar Peter I, he was Tsar back in the day. He was doing a northern war with the Sweden Empire during his reign. And one of the core issues during that fight was Ukraine. And Mazepa in Ukraine was doing his own politics, because in the Eastern Europe, everybody understands that in Poland, in Ukraine, in all the what we call Eastern Europe now, they understood that only two dynasties, Gediminovичи and Rurikovichi, and Romanovs ruling Russia were part of neither. But they did want to continue bringing their mission. They already had that Orthodox Christianity mission that they wanted to bring around. And Feofan Prokopovich was, I think, a genius at the time. He knew 9 languages. He studied in Jesuit Catholic establishments in Europe. He was a big fan of the idea of the Orthodox country. I don't know if our viewers know, but in the Orthodox religion country, a czar by idea is supposed to have some rank in the church, even the lowest rank, but he needs to be part of the church establishment. And that was the whole idea of a symphony of church and government behind the Orthodox Christianity. So the czar cannot be a civil figure, he needs to be a clerical figure. And Prokopovich was concerned with that. He was also understanding that their bickering with Poland was an issue. He is the rector of Kiev Mogilean Academy. His pals were in Holy Synod. His friends were there during the Niconian reforms. He had a big purge in that organization, and as the head of the Holy Synod appointed by Peter, he was running around with an idea of that Orthodox Empire, and having that big library of ideas and knowledge, he comes to Peter and suggests that let's rename Rus into Russia, because this is just the name of Russia in Greek, and let's rename Rus into Russia. So we'll also call Tsar an emperor. And his colleagues were also not dumb. They were asking him, so what would be our right to gathering new lands? We are Romanovs, we are not Gediminoviches, we are not Rurikovich. And that's when he stated that it's not important which family starts the empire. Empire has a different ontological and metaphysical status, and it gets the right to gather lands and to promote its doctrine, because the justification for such an empire is the idea and not the blood right, as it goes with czars and kings. Because if to compare with the West, the emperor in Orthodox Empire is a very peculiar figure. He connects the best abilities and features of Roman Pope and the Western king. If all the political life in the early West stemmed on the difference on the poles between the poles of Pope and King, this one combines both, and it creates a hybrid. So in just about 3 years, he convinced everybody. They rename Moscow Duchy into Rus. That is one of the biggest historical thefts of identity happening, and it starts a new epoch. It's ontologically is a different epoch. It starts with a victory over Sweden as one of the big empires in Europe. As many people noted and historians, that Russian Empire was born under Poltava, at the end of the war with Sweden, and they start a long intrigue because the central question of Moscow imperialism was the question of Ukraine. Why? Very simple reason, because even now, 300 years later, and throughout these 300 years, we had people who remember who stole whose identity. And if you stole somebody's name, like if Arestovych, for example, decided to call himself Yulia Latynina, whom will he have issues forever? He will have issues with Yulia Latynina and her heirs and her relatives. Even if the whole world will believe that you are Yulia Latynina, you'll even have a sign in United Nations telling that your ambassador is Yulia Latynina. And you can correct all the books. There are still people who remember who is real Yulia Latynina. So that's a big issue, and Ukraine has to disappear. This is the birth trauma of Russian Empire. Why? Because in the norm, empire doesn't require anyone to disappear. An empire, de facto, is a structure that can accommodate different cultural codes. British Empire never forbade other peoples to speak their languages. They did not come to India, did not forbid Indians to speak their languages. If you want to deal with chancellery and with the crown, you need to speak English, but otherwise you can speak your local. They were different times, of course, but in the most part they were actually building roads, building trade routes, supporting different kinds of growth. The only empire that I know of that was suppressing national identity was Russian Empire in relation to Ukraine, because they were suppressing the competitor. They were not suppressing national identity, they were suppressing a competitor. And when here in Ukraine some supposedly smart people are telling me that why don't we do like in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, why don't we forbid Russian language when we basically do single citizenship, you cannot do dual citizenship, and you cannot be citizen of Russia and Ukraine, and there'll be nothing Russian here, and I'm not meaning Russian as Moscow Empire as that, I'm meaning Rus as the original Russian. This statement borders with pathology of connecting reality with the mind picture, because neither Georgia, nor Lithuania, nor Latvia or Estonia compete with Moscow for the first birthright. And we do. We are the Russians here, if to really be blunt and historically accurate. But in order to differentiate between Russians, what we are used to calling Russians, they're using Ruski with one S and a soft sign. In Lvov, there is still a street with that name. In Rzecz Pospolita, the early Poland country, there was one of the groups that was called Russians. Bogdan Khmelnytsky was a Russian Getman. So everybody knew in Eastern Europe that Russians lived here, and Moscow stole that brand. And like with every thief, you have issues with that later. So their task was to make Ukraine disappear as Rus and to make us forget who we are. This is one of the main tasks that Russian Empire had to deal with and is still dealing with. It went through many variants of working with that. But what people remember in Ukraine real well, it's a so-called M's order, or Value's order. It's a prohibition to publish books in Ukrainian or write drama pieces in Ukrainian. Back under Alexander II in 1876, and then just a couple years later, the Scientific Society came out and said, in opposition to that, and said, no, this is barbarism, let's stay within the scientific purity and let's not make the whole world laugh. There is Ukrainian language, it needs to be studied, and it needs to be considered as one of the languages of empire. And these were the brave scientists of those days. And if we go deeper into the metaphysics of what Putin used to support his war, and that's what they're talking about in their books and their booklets, what we capture, what we see, what we hear, what they were saying under Kiev and Kherson and Zaporozhye. There are no Ukrainians. You're deceived. You're just Russians. Ukrainians is invention of some NATO general commander or whatever. It's not so important. It's just you don't exist. But in fact, we can tell them back. There is no Russia. There is Rus. We are real Russians and you are Moscovians. And that's a big difference. And when I understood that, a little bit of a storytelling, it was my personal enlightenment. I came and wrote in the chalk on a big wall that everything that Prokopovich spoiled, Arestovych will try to bring back. This is a huge injustice in front of God, people, and history. This is such a huge identity theft that we cannot afford that to exist. And here's, you see my... What's written on this? It says, Rus is Ukraine. Yes, like on your Facebook, exactly. There were times of Ukrainian politics that were conducted by Soviet Union. The best and most full dictionary of Ukrainian language was published during the Soviet times. There were times when Ukrainian culture blossomed under USSR, actually. There were at least 3 different revivals, and there were good connections. Overall, in 300 years, actually more than that. So we do have a lot of codependent relations with Moscow-centric part of Russian world. And USSR, at its best times, was led by Ukrainian-born people. And now we have another attempt. That's what we're facing. Putin and the gang that surrounds him decided upon the line of action that is both hybrid and absolutely crazy. Why? Because what is he doing? He is doing anti-imperialist politics. He is bringing Russian world everywhere. And in regards to Ukraine, he couldn't invent anything better than to just join Ukrainian territories to Moscow lands and call everybody here a Russian. This is an anti-imperial project in its core. It is aggressive, it's vulgar, but it's national-based, as not as Rus, but as Russia-based idea. Even in the history of Soviet Union, in the 60s, 1970s, they had processes happening against the Russian project. Even Shukshin and Vysotsky, Shukshin belonged to that, Vysotsky bordered or touched upon that. But KGB guys who were serving in those days said that, and even the political leadership, they had people who were asking questions, uncomfortable questions. They had different ministries for republics, which they did not have for Russia. So Russia had less representation than some of the republics on the political level, as a person, as an entity. So Putin, supposedly an imperial child of that Russia, he's doing a very anti-imperial project now. He's supposed to be doing something different, but he's not, and he's actually toppling the whole set of imperial ideas, and I'm hopeful for the imperial overthrow to happen there, because Russia in its current state cannot exist if it is not an empire. As a national Russian country, that's a whole other story with very different consequences. So then the question comes, what will the other 85 subjects of Russian Federation do right now? Are they betting on orthodoxy instead? Okay, where do you put 29 million a quarter of Muslims in Russia in such a project, and nobody's asking these questions in Russia these days. And here in Ukraine, very few people ask these questions as well, because many of them are running around with an outdated kind of 1930s magazines that were conducting anti-Moscow, anti-Soviet propaganda with the main narrative that eternal Russian imperial oppression and desire to torture poor Ukrainian people. But the truth is not in that. The truth is different. And Russia right now, from the standpoint of its whole history, is the main issue they have is anti-imperialism of Putin that is destroying its core. And in Ukraine, one of the main issues is that not even in building Ukraine as Rus, but we have issues even with building Ukraine as a national country. And these two projects are in a severe opposition inside Ukraine, almost with a desire to annihilate each other. The idea to build a national-centric country in Ukraine. Anti-colonial discussion in that group is very strong, but it's the biggest stupidity. And if I was Russian FSB, or those people who are making decisions on these things, I would be investing a lot into that discussion in Ukraine. Ukraine as a poor colony that was being tortured by damned Moscow colonizers. Because by definition... sorry, Alexey, can I add my couple cents here? Because that discussion actually surprises me. This is a discussion of losers, so to say. It's a translation of critical race theory into Russian or Ukrainian language. We've always been tortured, we are the oppressed, we are the losers. And Ukraine was always the strongest part of Russian Empire. She was one of the winners for a long time. Yulia, it's even worse. Ukraine is actually the creator of Russian Empire. Ukrainians created it. The Ukrainians also actively participated in creation of USSR. There was Knyaz Nikolai Trubetskoy, who dedicated half of his life to research of Ukrainian influence in Moscow. And he was saying that it is defining, it is playing a defining role in Russian history. Who doesn't believe me, Moscovites? You can go tomorrow, or whenever you have time, to a place called Khokhlovsky Pereulok. There is a very nice-looking palace there of representatives of Hetman at the Tsar's court, even now being dilapidated, not fully preserved. It looks like half of Louvre, roughly. You can imagine the scale of influence. And our homegrown meta-historians who are fed by grants from Canadian universities, where everything is very lefty. In those universities in the West, Trotskyism has prevailed a long time ago, and anti-colonial discourse is pretty much the only thing they peddle right now. And they're thinking in the categories of national liberation fight with the colonialism flavor. In this regard, they're not better than Putin, because both are involved, engaged in direct refutation of history. Somebody said that the main mystery of Russia is its real history. Same thing goes for Ukraine. And that deceit was done by Ukrainian, by Prokopovich in Moscow, and it's deceiving both. It continues hundreds of years later. It continues to deceive both Russians and Ukrainians. Russian side continues to push idiotic propaganda, which has nothing to do with real history. And in Ukraine, we also have activists who are peddling a similar flavor of fakery. I have a question. For how long? How long can that go on? Do adults really want to build their picture of the world based on a very primitive, basic lie? What's the point? Alexey, unfortunately, I have to say here that the picture of the world is being built not because of what's really happening, what's really going on, but because of psychological comfort and circles of interests. If some group is psychologically comfortable with a certain idea, especially with, for example, that left idea translated into Russian or Ukrainian, is comfortable for them, it will continue to exist. Because it's a very simple idea in our times. I can, however, just to try to imagine Scotland was integrated into Great Britain. It's hard to call Scotland a colony, right? Imagine they fall apart. Let's not look into the idiotic situation when Britain would start a war with Scotland. That will be madness. But imagine they separated. They parted ways. There probably will be some numbers in Scotland telling stories how they were colonially oppressed, but I suspect it will not really fly. This whole story of the colony was invented by Willy Latynina and the Soviet agents in the early 20th century for the whole other set of territories conquered by empires, not for the territories, not for the territories that actually were founding members of the empires. Yulia, I understand a little bit in collective subconsciousness, I think. Let's take a look at the facts. Who was Bezborodko? Are we going back to chancellors of Russian Empire? And we can also remember Khrushchev and Brezhnev, exactly, all of them, normal Ukrainians. Who was the civil husband of the daughter of Peter, Elizaveta? Razumovsky, right? A guy from the choir from Poltava, also Ukrainian territory. Who was the amazing battle commander? No other can even stand nearby. Who took 9 capitals in Europe, formally. Paskevich, he was another Poltava nobleman. What colony? What freaking colony are we talking about? We can also take space, airspace. Oh, that's how empires work, Alexei. Another Russian battle leader was Barclay de Tolly, right? And he was okay. Well, Khmelnytsky also had another guy, right hand, Maxim Krivonосov, who was reportedly on one of the versions a Scottish origin guy who came to Ukraine and Ukrainianized himself. So empires, yeah, they do take different cultures. And I know people will. Sorry, I'll stop in here. Some people will throw tomatoes at me, but remember the guy who added Siberian lands to Russian Empire? Yermak, a truly Russian last name. But a guy with the same name is now second person, one of the second persons in the Ukrainian government, right? Yermak. Who captured Siberia? Who conquered Siberia? Oh yeah, Siberia was conquered by Cossacks. In anti-colonial discourse here, in the grand narrative, they like to say that evils from Moscow were coming to Ukraine and were burning and killing everybody, starting with Bogolyubsky. We can, in return, take a look how much did they burn and destroy on the territory of Moscow Duchy back in the day. I will say a very upsetting point for the colonialists now. Ukraine was suppressed, not less and not more. I meaning not in the numerical quantities of victims, but in general, in comparison with Moscow lands. When Razin, Pugachev, and Bolotnikov rebellions were being hanged and executed, when Novgorod Republic was erased and just destroyed completely, when Ryazan was burnt, when Alexander Nevsky was suppressing rebellion by his own brother Andrei and was supporting Mongols. What is that? I have said before, and I will say again, the most suffered peoples from Russian rulers were so-called Russian people. They suffered the most because there was not more trampled upon peoples in the Russian Empire. For example, at the moment of falling apart of Soviet Union, 70% of Ukrainian villages had access to natural gas. And in Russia, over half of villages are still without gas. So who is torturing whom more? So there was a good, a normal, not good, a normal from the standpoint of three imperial tasks. There was a normal empire, and Barclay de Tolly. You can just look at the census of 1846. I think 2/3 of their population are Germans. So there is a question, legit question, what did Germans do in that empire, where everybody were oppressed? Why did they come there? And Putin is the guy who broke that trend. Completely. There is no empire. There is an attempt to drop the national surroundings in a certain way and redo Ukraine in a Russian image and basically call them Russian and grow by lands and by population. And they keep stealing our kids, by the way. Official numbers are about 15,000, unofficial up to 150,000. This is basically kidnapping and genocide. They're just doing normal, in quotes, transferred population and settlement, resettlement of the territory. So he's the dumbest politician one can imagine with everything that's going on, if you think a little bit and analyze it. I will add a little more here, Alexey. I'm sorry interrupted you. Let me go. If one could think something else stupid that could be done by Moscow, I don't think I would be able to imagine to do anything more stupid. I would run out of my imagination. So there are two characters that we've been discussing often here, Kadyrov and Prigozhin, who are the full embodiment of this regress idea. Because Kadyrov, in our view, is playing a certain role. Putin wants to bring Russia back to barbarism. Kadyrov is a representative of the ethnic minority, the one which joined Russian Empire back in the day and was hoping to become part of Europe. So, accordingly, what ideal can Putin offer Chechnya now? What can impress them and say, oh, we'll live well, we'll have good Western values, we'll have science being developed, industry being developed? No, Putin is suggesting that an older formation, family and tribal formation, to be developed instead. And Chechnya will not see value in that because they know the tribal relations much better than Moscow does. They can beat Moscow in that game at any time. So what's the reason for them to be part of that? Or Prigozhin with that sledgehammer. How can you build an empire with a sledgehammer? You can destroy an empire with a sledgehammer, but you cannot build one like that. As some of the Mongols who conquered Chinese empire back in the day said, you can conquer the empire from the back of the horse, but you cannot manage the empire from the back of the horse. So with the sledgehammer, same thing. Yulia, who was the youngest son of Shamil, the leader of resistance in Caucasus? He was a cadet in a military academy in St. Petersburg, right? But it's a very tragic story. That poor guy, after St. Petersburg, died from tuberculosis. And one of the other things was that when he came home after 10 years spent in St. Petersburg, he tried to explain to his father what is his father fighting with. And from that barbarianism that was surrounding him back home, it just exacerbated his disease, and he died soon. He passed away. He was a great Russian Empire officer. And who was protecting czars? Who was the bodyguards of the czars? Oh, the Wild Division. Yeah, it's not exactly a good empire, I think, but very often in the imperial structures, let's say Emperor Frederick II, he really liked protectors, bodyguards, to be hired from some other nation, because he was their only support. And that can only an emperor do. That's his decision. Like in Lithuanian country, when they had more influence, what did Arabs do? They were also bodyguards. So Chechens also playing a sort of bodyguard function in Russian Empire. What did Russian Empire do when they conquered, let's say, one of the Asian territories? If there was a formation there, government with towns and social structure, they would destroy everybody who's resisting. The ones who joined them, what happened after? Oh yeah, they would consume them and integrate them immediately. Immediate incorporation of the elites into the empire. Right. So all the nobility was included on the imperial rights to the overall imperial nobility. And every guy from a small village could become a cosmonaut, academician, minister, general secretary of USSR, anything. All the Soviet ministers, by the way, were usual village boys, most of them. And all of them, or most of them, in their memoirs were saying that I would have never taken that position, been able to even have that position, if not for the empire, if not for the bigger structures of the USSR or the Tsar Empire. By the way, yeah, we're getting corrected that Russian Federation did have ministries. We did make a small mistake there, and we are glad to correct it. We just got a little carried away, but the point was similar. They were never promoting that national side of Russia. The point I was making is that empire is a very complex construct, and the central idea is the one above the empire. It's the all mankind idea. It's the idea of building some kind of civilization with a certain values and concepts. And this is the problem for all non-empires, for national countries, because national countries and nationalism as a societal phenomenon has nothing to offer to the global world, because national idea of Uzbeks or Russians or Ukrainians is not interesting to anybody. Scots are not interested in Russian ideas or in Uzbeks ideas, and Chinese ideas are not interesting to them too. And the world is not interested in Scottish idea. And China cannot offer anything serious to the world because they're lacking in that department. The idea above the Chinese structure. They have Han idea of Chinese national country. They have Confucianism with communism, an interesting mix of these three. That's an interesting topic for research, but they don't have anything global. They don't have anything to offer to the world on a global scale. So imagine Russian invasion into Ukraine if Russia would be a proper empire, the way they should be doing it. Do you want to play it out? Sure, let's do Alexey. Well, first of all, they would have come with an idea that Ukraine has to be. Ukraine is a subject. They would have opened on the 22nd of February last year a big monument to Shevchenko, preferably 100 yards tall, all of gold, and Putin should have come there and put flowers to that and pointed and said some and quoted in Ukrainian some poem saying that this is one of our cultural fathers. Second moment, they should have opened at least 200 Ukrainian language schools in Russia. Publish everything that was written in Ukrainian on the best paper, in the golden covers, open 150 Ukrainian libraries for about 5 years before, or at least 2 years before the war, do Ukrainian readings and Ukrainian cultural studies, and keep sending an idea that Ukraine is our mother. They are our founding start. And if to be honest, we are actually the younger brothers of Ukrainians. And Kiev is the mother of all Russian cities. That would have been a preparation. Then what could they say? They would have said, let's see what's happening. Damned West, the proverbial damned West, had stolen our heart. They managed to convince our older brothers from the same family that they are some kind of separate people from us, that their spiritual home is in the West, and that they are basically anti-Rus, anti-Russia. So they were stolen from themselves, not even from us. And to correct this historical error, to allow the real Ukraine to bloom, grow, and prosper, we are starting this special military operation. They should have set an ultimatum. All nationalists in Ukraine should surrender immediately, and that guarantees their amnesty. No executions, no tortures, no Yelenovkas and such, just a full amnesty, full pardon. Every serviceman of Ukrainian military switching to Russian side gets one rank higher, gets promoted. If you've been regular infantry, you become corporal, colonel becomes general. What else? Everybody who wants to partake in the imperial projects, from science to politics, immediately get incorporated into the imperial elites. They get similar benefits to and rights to somebody whose family descending from Moscow bureaucrats, and get the same rights and opportunities to work and do anywhere on the territory of the empire. With any attempt of Russian soldier to steal anything, or even send a wrong message on any of Ukrainian citizens, immediate, open court-martial with the heaviest prosecution and condemnation for the whole family for that. And everybody should have supported that. Military, church leaders, cultural leaders. And that would have been an imperial project. That's how a normal empire would do. And what these idiots are doing, I'm not even going to attack that as many people are doing, because frankly we've been commenting on that for already a year, since the start of that war. I want to attack Russia today from the imperial positions, even from that point of view, to show Putin and his regime that they're complete idiots, utter idiots. And that's it. As a thought experiment, just to show that they're complete failure, even by their own criteria. Alexey, I have one better also. In the 20s and the 10s, when Putin was on the strongest in Russia, instead of taking all the businesses and sharing it with his own inner circle, and basically making people of Russia poor and becoming super rich instead himself and his inner circle. So if instead he would have gathered oligarchs and he would supported arts, culture, business, oligarchs are important too. At the early steps of democratic society, formed oligarchs play a role, a funding role for different political parties. It's not the only way, but it's not a bad way. We see that Ukraine actually followed through and finally actually prevailed and got to a good position. And Putin consumed all of his independent oligarchs and basically took everything for himself. So if instead he was supporting the variety, if he opens more universities, if he opens more contacts with, say, Georgia, instead of fighting with them, and if oligarchs want to support the country, they would not be investing into his enforcement agencies or government or himself, but they would be investing money in development, in science, in the future. And Putin would have acknowledged that the heart of our empire is rather Western, and our values very much align with the traditional European values. And we're talking about Moscow as an idea of a third Rome. The whole idea of that, Feofan Prokopovich stole it. He was the student of Jesuits, and he knew it very well. He stole it from Karl the Great, basically, because the idea of translating the empire or transference of the empire from Romans to the Greeks and then from Greeks to Europe, it was designed in the 800s. And when Karl wanted to create some governmental entity, and as a king of Franks, he had some logistical issues, and he needed a bigger authority. So that's when he said, I want to create an empire. Empire at that time was only Roman. It was a personal name of Roman Empire. And he had some issues because Constantinople Empire still existed. And he actually fought that and said that had to attack Constantinople and say that this is a fake empire, mine is going to be real. And there were others. There were Bulgarians who said Trnava, they're another Rome. There were Serbs who said Skopje was another capital of the next empire. Trapezunt. French were also saying that they are the third Rome. Germany was playing the cards of a third Rome for a while. So that idea was well accepted by Europe at large, and Feofan Prokopovich did not invent anything new with his idea of a third Rome, but he stole an absolutely Western idea. And Putin should have said that if we want to become a true third Rome, where was Rome? It was not in Antarctic. It was not in Beijing. It was in the center of Europe. So let's, guys, follow the path. And then prosperous Russia wouldn't even matter whose Crimea is, because if we all cooperate, it doesn't make any difference, and the total is bigger than the sum of components. You see, Yulia, that set of web of lies they're spreading from modern-day Kremlin. When Putin made Crimea the jewel of his king's hat, he showed his real scale. In the scale of imperial discourse, our grand narrative, adding Crimea was something in the news. It would be somewhere between 2000 agricultural machinery being made and a new terminal of some power plant in Nizhny Vartovsk. Right, exactly. Soviet Union was connecting continents, and he's being proud of stealing Crimea. If he said instead, let's revive the West, because Europe is now turning into a museum, we can take the banner. And the big empire, Roman Empire-style country, cannot leave any member of the West indifferent. So let's do that. And even today, Putin has a ton of sympathizers, especially on the right. The guys, even among the Republicans on the right in the United States, there is a whole group of people who sympathize him, who are saying that Putin is lesser evil than BLM. And imagine if Putin came out with an idea of a global conservative project. And I think indeed he noted some weaknesses of the West, because let's not discuss that, otherwise we'll spend another 2 hours here. And he could exploit that in creative way and offer a better version of the West, which actually is now being offered by Poland, by young members of the West, like Poland and such, who are saying that, yeah, you guys forgot some things about private property, about other standard values, or core values, in lieu of some leftist ideas. I want to bring up another thing. When Khodorkovsky was put in jail in early 2000s, it was right on the eve of Yukos exchanging shares with a big Western company. I think it was Chevron. ExxonMobil, I think, refused that, but the idea was that with Western shares being diluted between different shareholders, even that small part of actions that Yukos traded for his own actually became one of the controlling sets. And there were other companies which could have done the same, and they could have escaped Putin's control by means of that mechanism, and he would not be able to just do as he pleases with them. They would have stopped being the subjects, the national subjects. They would have become international subjects. He would not be able to call the oligarchs from these companies like he's doing now and tell them, hey, you do this, you do this. He would not be able to do that. But that would have been a new integration with the world, which, first of all, completely would have excluded everything happening now from theoretical possibility, because normal countries in the 21st century don't do that. And they would have excluded that regression of barbarianism. They would have excluded Prigozhin with his sledgehammer, or Kadyrov, which, by the way, I heard is spending most of his time in Arab Emirates, and he's sending posts that he will advance to, I don't remember, Warsaw or Washington, and capture everything. That would have eliminated this other branch of history and would have alleviated these difficult issues we're facing now, which do not have a simple solution or a good solution, maybe. That would have been a very different, beautiful world we would be living in. And let's look at it from another standpoint. One of the leading projects of USSR was Vernadsky project, the Noosphere project. This was started with the Commission of Exploitation of Natural Resources after Russia lost the Russian-Japanese War, and the revolution of 1917. There are more facts pointing that this project had something to do with it. So Putin got $1.5 trillion on oil and gas since 2007. And most of that is being arrested now, right, and will be spent to rebuilding the Ukraine. Exactly. Some sources say he got even more. And that country, by the way, is the birthplace of cosmonautics. What did he do in this? This was one of the biggest banners. This was one of the ideas, the solo idea that could have touched everybody in the world today. Because that Noosphere project has a lot of supporters in the West. Well, one of them, the most known, is Elon Musk. And it's an idea that's going beyond the size of beyond our civilization on this planet. It was born between Vernadsky and Chardin together. And the thankful humanity would have gone a different way, somewhere to the world of midday, like Strugatsky described it, and thankful humanity would be building monuments to him 150 yards tall till the end of his life. And instead, he preferred some golden bathroom cleaning utensils in some obscure palace hidden from everybody. And this man is being referred to as somebody who is reviving the greatness of Russia? This is absurd. Alexey, I'll also tell you about the investments and the noosphere. Very often, it is considered not entirely right that the science in Europe just was born by itself, that people started doing science. But the paradox is, if you look at all the early scientists, I'm not even talking about kings' academies, which are often started by kings or his favorites or ministers, I'm meaning Ludwig XV, that also took place. But there were a lot of situations when Medicis in Florence, by the way, who were taught by famous Galileo, and that story with him was not a simple story. It was very connected to political infighting in Italy in those days. And ending with the imperial leaders like Catherine the Great, and who was writing letters to Voltaire. Frederick the Great, who was also communicating with Voltaire. And when Voltaire, for example, came to Frederick and they quarreled about something, and that damn Voltaire wrote an interesting stuff about why Frederick likes tall and handsome guardsmen in the style that some parts of gay Moscow would really appreciate. So it was a really bitter fighting between them, but they still, at the end of it, struck peace. And Frederick understood that Voltaire is a big figure. And at the bed of dying Voltaire, Frederick visited him and actually asked forgiveness. And all of these great cultural and scientific leaders were always supported by politicians or by people in power. And Putin could have done that. He could have supported that. Being half authoritarian or authoritarian, however you call him, he could have expanded his influence. And what his oligarchs are doing, buying soccer teams. People who could have funded, I don't know, that same trip to Mars or spent money on exploration of the solar system. And right, Musk would have come to Putin instead. These people would be forgiven all their sins if they went this path instead, but they didn't. They could have sent humanity to a whole new level, but they drained everything down the toilet. Not even resources. They drained the idea itself. Now, every Russian imperialist needs to sincerely dream how to kill Putin and pee on his grave. Because you cannot find more anti-imperial person. And all the peoples who do not like Russian Empire, they need to give him top-level medal award for his tireless work, because he cancelled the results of about, starting from Alexey Mikhailovich, all results. Yeah, Alexey started his run to the west. This new army was being formed, so it's like 1500s. Yeah, everything. Nothing is left out of it. The window to the west is closed because Finland and Sweden, that's closed Baltic Sea. Ukraine is behind the Iron Curtain, hating Kremlin with such a vicious hatred that you can't even imagine. Ukraine is joining NATO, and remember that evil NATO that they're trying to push away. And Siberia will be a desert for Chinese and Japanese. So, good job, Vlad. What can we say? I think the lovers of Russian Empire will listen to that stream. That Strelkov is already posting Navalny's research on his channels. So maybe he will start to question what did Putin do for his beloved empire. And I think there are a lot of colonels in the general command who also do not agree with dying in Ukraine for no reason and who see what's happening with the country. Alexey, do we have a couple more minutes? Because we're breaking the frame of this stream. Just wanted to conclude it with returning to the current military situation, because right now we're talking about the impending offensive of Ukrainian military with the help of Western arms. And I think it's strange. It's not the most important when the Ukrainian military will be conducting this offensive. The main part would be to reform the Ukrainian military to that army of the 21st century, to the NATO arms. Because Putin now is building some army, some pre-imperial army. He's building something that will be able to conquer whatever they do with the aid of a sledgehammer. And that sophisticated process that's happening in Ukraine is inducing the building of the army of the 21st century, which in turn will induce the buildup of the society of the 21st century. And people will be asking in chat, they're already commenting on that the main part for Ukraine is not really switch to offensive too soon, but to get these weapons, to rebuild themselves, to make sure they are strong and they can achieve their goals. And in the meantime, if they lose a couple meters or a couple kilometers, that's all right. And the question of will Bakhmut fall or not is not that important. The bigger question is about reforming the society, because the tragedy right now, in my view, is that Ukraine will absolutely become the country of the 21st century and will become the integral part of Europe. And if in Russia there will not be a revolt, Russia will keep falling into some black hole. From the point of view of collective subconsciousness, the war is given to peoples to integrate their shadow into their new reality, to find the missing piece of their shadow previously ignored and digest and add it to their society, to the culture. Ukrainians started doing it really well at the beginning of this war, but at the end we kind of fell prey to our dark side of our nature. Each country has it. In Ukrainian, I think we can say there are two. There is a sadist and this one doesn't really work. I didn't think it manifested itself. But zlob, the other one, how do you find that? How did you find that meaning, Alexey? Oh, zlob is a person who is looking into his... he's doing navel gazing, who thinks only about himself, for himself, and also vulgar and bold because that's his main life strategy. So thuggish, right? Okay. And Russia needs to integrate its own shadow. And what is a shadow of Russia? Okay, what is a shadow of Russia? I would mirror that question to you, because I don't think I have a handy answer. It's not about Paskevich question. So developing that theory of war, when Soviet Union got disappointed with the ideals, in the 60s they still believed in themselves, in the 70s they got disappointed and they invaded Afghanistan. And Afghanis mujahids showed them what is true belief. They showed them what are true believers. And what did they learn from Soviet Union? They learned how to do big projects. That's how Taliban got born. When America could not digest its own sexual revolution and whatever else was happening there, one could say they needed ideas of Zen Buddhism. They got into Vietnam and brought that part of the culture back. And what did Vietnam learn? First they fought with France, then they fought with US, and what are they doing now? They're doing a very good modern drive. It took them some time to digest it, but they're now growing capitalist country. When, yeah, it took them quite a bit to learn, exactly, but they digested it. They're good now. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? To figure out the Maidan technologies of horizontal connections, of active society, that the ontology of life in the government, in the country, is not just government, that it actually active society that can define a lot of things. And why do we need that war? What can it bring to Ukraine? We, I think, need to understand and learn how to use the main competitive advantage of Kremlin. How do you hit in the same spot for 300 years until you get your results? To cross the left bank to the right bank in Ukraine and add the whole territory, it took them 300 years, but they did it. And as an empire. So there's a lot to learn in this regard. But there is another part of a shadow. Russia is looking for a new form of an empire. And it will either find it or it will stop existing. Putin is doing everything for Russia to not find its new shape, its new form of an empire. Putin is doing everything so Russia would fall apart in the shortest time frame. And Russia will need to answer the question to itself. What does it want? New Russian educated empire? Or they do want Moscow Duchy, a Moscow national organization country with Muscovites as the core populace. And is that all they want and all they dream and all they're proud about? And they do not pretend to play any more important part in the world history, like Gagarin, like those big achievements. So that's the answer they need to find. All right. I think Russian colonels need to start thinking heavy about it. This was Yulia Latynina and Alexey Arestovych. Sorry, we spilled a little bit, actually a lot, over the time frame, but and we probably didn't discuss much the missiles that are being shot over Kiev, but I think we talked about not less important things. And we had 35,000 watching us live. Please continue clicking the like button, sharing and subscribing. Latynina TV, Alexey Arestovych, and if you are listening to that in English, to the privateer station. Thank you very much, Alexey. And thank you, Yulia, as well. See you later.